Nirvana Prakarana, The Transcendence, Chapter 18, The 7 Stages of Yoga, Part 2. He had never seen anything like this before. Nature at its very best, and the local people totally in tune with it. The apricots, pears, and apples only reflected the sweetness of the people. The snow-capped peaks depicted their innocence. The Godwin Mount, or K2 as it is called, could be seen almost throwing a challenge to scale it. But he was not a mountaineer, nor was he an adventurer in the strictest terms. He was a doctor, posted at Gilgit by the government. He was fulfilling his duty, and strangely enough, the duty as such was very pleasant, because the people belonged to a very healthy stock whose main diet was the fruits, both seasonal and dried. After his arrival there, he had innately felt that he, a doctor, had many things to learn about health from the people. He had seen the old dying never of sickness, only of old age. All of them were natural. The middle-aged, the youth and the children were exuberant, overflowing with health and energy. The respect he developed for them, and they for him, was mutual. He decided to take a tour around the area. It was one of those mountain villages where the houses are in different levels. His arrival had been known to the people there, who had arranged for his accommodation in a hut on top. It was evening when he felt like a stroll and was drinking from the ample nature. The amber sunlight reflected from the snow caps, the violet vegetation on the lesser hills, the clouds brushing the shoulders of the immovables, the red and winding footpaths that showed the bridges between the people's hearts, involved him so much that he did not realize the passage of time. By the time he started back to the residence for the night, it was dark, and he had forgotten the way back, and he was alone, and he was new. All that beauty he had felt got transformed itself into fear. He could feel his heart thumping, mouth becoming dry, breathing had taken a style of palpitation. And wherever he turned and walked, he felt convinced that none would help him. There was panic, a chaos. The situation was so shocking that it woke him up. But everything he had seen in the dream was so vivid. Of course it had to be. There were many things in the dream that had become part of his memory. He still was a doctor. He had been to Gilgit and spent his first few years there. He had learnt about health from the lovable people there, as they were the personification of health itself, for he had never used his medicine on them. So much so that he had chosen to become a scientist committed to the research of medicines and their harmful effects, and to devote himself to the science of naturopathy. The sense of beauty of as well as attraction to the place, and the sense of fear and repulsion for the same place were real. And most of all, the palpitation and violent heartbeat continued for some time. There were some things which were not real in the dream. The Godwin Mount, or K2, was not the part of that time. It was fairly recent. The image of the mount was from a magazine and was overimposed in the area in his mind. He had never lost his way while in Gilgit, for he was never alone there. Suddenly, a peculiar question crossed his mind. Was the memory of his experiences some 50 years back real? Were they not the images of the days gone by in the brain as much real as the photograph of K2 he had seen in the magazine? And from the point of view of science, perhaps the mount was more real as he could show the magazine to others. Many a time, such sudden awakenings act as the starting points for the quest. Sometimes the seizure is so violent that it wakes up a person permanently, as it did in the case of Maharshi Ramana, when the fear of death totally internalized his consciousness permanently. But most of the time, as most of us are totally involved with survival, these experiences only act as lullabies to put us back to deeper slumber. There cannot be, however, any general rule for the initiation of the quest, as anything can become an impetus for the turning point. Many times, the indulgence or involvement in the world itself may give such a shock to a person so as to transform her or his life, because the very indulgence or involvement become cause for intense pain and misery in life. And all these scriptures start with guidance at this point. That is why many of the Shastras begin with Atha or now, or Athatha, now therefore, which indicate that the person eligible to study the Shastra has to be at the point when he or she has started experiencing a sense of bondage to the world, because without it there is misery. And each one of us gets the inner call sometime or the other. An irreplaceable loss or death or of a near and dear one invariably turns the sufferer into a philosopher. Perhaps the most congenial place for discussing philosophy is the cremation ground. But only a very few transform their lives after coming back from there. George Gurdjieff used to narrate a parable to describe the condition of man. There used to be a shepherd who was also a talented musician. He had thousands of sheep. He had a very ingenious way of protecting his stock. He would individually hypnotize them and suggest that it was a tiger while others were sheep. This practice had a great advantage, that the sheep would be totally free from the fear of death, so much so that even when its companions were slaughtered for the feast in front of its very eyes, it would think, one more sheep has been slaughtered. Each one of us thinks that one is unique, strong and talented. Whenever someone dies, it never crosses the mind that it happens to be everyone it happens to everyone without exception. But then, all these belong to the common rung of persons who have to take repeated births to become eligible for spirituality. The very second shloka of this scripture describes the eligibility as an intense feeling of bondage as well as an aspiration to free oneself from it. The first three bhumikas are the three conscious, willful, and effortful steps to be taken by such eligible persons. Necessarily, they are very important and decisive in a seeker's journey. The details of the techniques and attitudes have been given in all the preceding chapters. The gist is given by the scripture while explaining the first three bhumikas, Shubhecha, Vicharana and Asangsanga. At the end of third bhumika, one has the glimpse into the reality. But it's only a glimpse. Sage Vasishta continued. By repeated samadhi, when they start seeing the whole manifest phenomenon as nothing but the expression of Brahman, which is indivisible and without beginning or end, they will enter the fourth bhumika. Established in the fourth bhumika, they have perfect Advaita or non dual vision. The perception of Dvaita or duality will not be there in them. They then see the world as in a dream. The first three stages can be classified as coming under Jagrat or wakeful consciousness, while the fourth is similar to the dream. In the fourth Bhumika, the mind perishes like a cloud in Sarat or autumnal days. At the end of third Bhumika, the glimpse leaves one restlessly thirsty for repeated experiences of Samadhi. This is a very vital stage in the journey. He starts putting all the effort at his disposal, yet there is delay. Sometimes the pang of separation from the experience is so much that one can even lose one's balance. We find this in the life of many saints, especially Paramahamsa Ramakrishna. During such times, he would spend sleepless nights and disturbed days. He would roll on the ground in intense pain, shed tears, cry out loud, and go without food for days. People were convinced that he had become mad. Of course, he would say later that he had become mad. He would also add that everyone was mad. Someone was mad for money, some other for wife, yet other for name and fame, while he was mad for God. This particular stage is referred to in the Christian tradition as the dark night of the soul. If one understands this state, one can cross it over without much difficulty, and this is where the details of the Bhumikas are of immense help to us. The seeker gets a glimpse only when he is free from all thought and expectation. This pining for another glimpse or aspiration for stabilizing it is also a desire, though more noble than the desire for a sense pleasure. By repeated samadhi, it means by continual asamsanga, non-attachment, one gets rid of even the aspiration for samadhi. The fourth bhumika, which is called as sattvapatti, is the state wherein the grip of the mind over sense objects has reduced and the realization is achieved, where there is apartness with the manifestations like thought, body, etc. Vasishta then described the fifth bhumika. When only the satta or the beingness remains, the fifth state is reached. The world delusion cannot arise with the dissolution of mind. Having reached this state, which can be called sushupti or deep sleep, there is no movement and only establishment of the blissful state of Advaita, the non-dual state. All notions of duality and multiplicity vanish. Totally rid of the duality, there will be no recognition of tribulations with no cognition as in the state of deep sleep. Though dwelling in world, like any other men, he remains peacefully in antarmukhata, appearing to be asleep because there are no reactions for the external turmoil. If this continues, then one steps into the fifth stage called asamsakti, which has been stated as the state of Advaita because there is no other. Because the dividing factor, the mind, is totally annihilated. This is the state of Jivan Mukti. The actions of such a person are not tainted by the notions, desires, expectations, and other spectacles to impair the vision. When such persons walk amidst the so-called normal men, he appears dazed, forgetful, and careless about his gross appearance. Sri Ramakrishna would say of such men, he spoke out of his own experience as it happened to him, that they are like the fisherman who has put a bait into the pond of fish, absent-minded to other things around while being attentive to the hook, line and sinker. Nothing else matters for him. Similarly, the consciousness is internalized in the fifth bhumika. What happens to the consciousness after the fifth stage is only of academic interest because the practice as such stops with the fourth and fifth bhumika. Vasishta, one of the Yuga Gurus, the preceptors of the age, described the next stage. After being in the fifth stage, when even the subtle vasanas are burnt off, one slips into the sixth stage of Turiya, also called as Padartha Bhavani or absolute non-perception of objects. In this stage, there is neither I nor not I, neither difference nor non-difference, neither being nor non-being. The jnani cannot fix whether he is embodied or otherwise. He will be without thoughts, beyond the notions of duality and oneness. In this state, unaffected as it is by the knot of ahankara, he is indeed a Jivan Mukta, for the Jiva Bhava has gone. Although he would not have attained Nirvana state Videha Mukti, he is all the same having Nirvana, for he does not cognize his body anymore. His body will be like that of a lamp in the picture, with just the appearance, but with none of its other features. He is empty within, empty without, like a pot held in the air. He is also full within and full without, like a pot immersed in the ocean. He possesses nothing, yet he possesses everything. Remaining in the sixth stage for a while, he slips into the seventh bhumika. In that state, the distinction between the reality and non-reality ceases. So also that of duality and non-duality. Reality is there only in relation to unreality. When one transcends the mind and comes to a state where there is no thought or movement, it is neither real nor unreal, but transcendental. Sometimes, when such a one acts, the onlookers may think that he has the I notion, but there is neither the presence nor the absence of I, as there is only Advaita. The world and the notions of time, space, subject, predicate, object, joy, misery, etc. will not be within him, for there is nothing like within for him. That is, there is no activity called the mind, and because of this, there is no without also. That is why the simile of a pot held in the air and water is given. He does not cognize the objects, and he does not have any sense of possession. But since he realizes himself to be the consciousness which is in everything, he has everything, which means that he has merged with Brahman, the substratum of the universe. Having tried to describe the sixth stage, Vasishta tried to do the same thing with the seventh. Rishis say that seventh Jnana Bhumika, or the stage of wisdom, is Videha Mukti. It is the last frontier of the realm of Jnana. It is pure peace and sublime quiescence that cannot be explained by the power of speech. That is the ultimate state. There is nothing beyond that. Some call it Shiva, some others Parabrahman, yet others Vishnu, while others Shunya. Some call it pure energy, some others unconditioned time, yet others Prakriti and Purusha. Although the ultimate cannot be explained by words, people call it by different names. Different persons try to name it according to their nature and aptitude. Vasishta inspired Rama to practice these 7 stages. Continuing, Vasishta said, "There is a mad, rutting elephant with great tusks, showering water as it goes, stalking the world with its writhing trunk spotted with white. If this animal, generating never-ending pain, be slain, then the mankind will cross all the various stages of jnana. So long as this mighty elephant spraying water is not killed, through one's might, one cannot become a great warrior in the battlefield of the universe of pain. Rama sought clarifications of the world mighty elephant, the battlefield, and also the method of annihilating it. Compassionate Vasishtha replied, "The wild elephant showering water is no other than pain generating desire that always tries to get hold of the eye, all the things of the universe with great relish, and has its residence in the forest of body. It has its young ones, the insatiable indriyas, the senses. It acts by identifying with the mind. The terrible twin karmas of good and bad are its tusks. The vasanas are the waters shed by it. It moves everywhere and at all times, as in fact space and time are also its progenies. All the perceivable objects that form the sansara is the battlefield. The elephant desire, which becomes a victor repeatedly, puts an end to many jivas. All the vasanas, with their modifications, existence, manas, buddhi, sankalpa, and the rest pertain to the antakarana, the lower mind only. With the weapon of dhairya or patient courage, one should conquer this rutting elephant of desire. If the mind longs after things of the world childishly, one should destroy it. So, for so long as the desire exists, the poisonous disease of samsara creeps in. The mind then takes control of the person, which is samsara itself. Destruction of the mind itself is moksha. If the disciple's mind is cleansed of all its illusions and is initiated by his preceptor, he obtains quiescence and remains separated in the world like a drop of oil on the surface of water. The calamity called the mind, full of desires, can be overcome by the process of asamvedana, the non-reactivity to sensations. Through the weapon called asamvedana, the vasanas which try to overpower the mind in so many ways can be totally destroyed. When the mind, through the practice of pratyahara, is freed from the vasanas, it remains still. This effort is called as asamvedana. A little explanation on the technique of asamvedana appears necessary here. The grossest facet of the antakarana, manas, is associated with indriyas, the senses. This facet is also the most restless. Unless this is quietened, one cannot possibly hope to enter the sacred temple of meditation. The effort of the rishis has been to first negotiate with this activity. Pratyahara is one such technique. Ahara, or the food in the Vedantic understanding, is not only that which is eaten, but all the food from the body-mind complex, and is necessarily includes whatever is perceived by the senses. So, pratyahara is that practice where this intake of food through the senses is made less disturbing. Sage Patanjali describes pratyahara. Swa Vishaya Samprayoge Chitta Swarupanukara Ivendriyanam Pratyaharaha. Pratyahara is, as it were, the imitation of the senses of the mind by withdrawal from their objects. Most of us are aware of this phenomena happening to us. In spite of many sense stimuli bombarding our consciousness, we are not aware of them all, because the capacity of the mind is limited and it can only do one action at a time. While senses are subservient to manas, we act as though we are subservient to the senses. So in this sense, pratyahara is the process of remembering the superiority of the manas. There are many techniques as there are as many techniques as there are people, but the method of the Buddha appears to be the nearest to the technique of asamvedana mentioned here. Normally, a seeker tends to judge the sense stimuli as pleasant or otherwise, good or bad, etc., and react to them. This act of judging as well as reacting forces not only the manas to indulge, but also buddhi, chittam, and ahankara to involve with the world outside. Buddha suggests just observing without either judging or reacting. Not only this, but he suggests further that all activity be observed in the like manner so that one can witness all activity without getting disturbed. He also added that the world and with it this stimuli with it offers to psyche is anicca or impermanent, and it appears and disappears. Vasishta said, the wise say that the idea of mind is the source of mind. By giving this up, one succeeds in giving up the mind. Remembrance is sankalpa, while its absence is beatitude, in which state there is neither the known nor the knower. Forgetting everything, one remains like a log of wood without any identification with the objects. Then he made a very bold statement. Kilatushnim stitenaiva tatpadam prapyate param paramam yatra samrajya api rama trinayate. O Rama, just by remaining silent, he definitely achieves the highest state, compared to which even the empire appears like a straw. Turning to those in the assembly, the great sage said, this has been the declaration of those who have trodden the path. To put it briefly, Sankalpa is bondage, and its absence is liberation. The world with its multiplicity is actually the manifestation of the quiescent, infinite consciousness. One who sees the consciousness amidst all elements and objects can remain ever blissful. The wise say that avedanam, non-reaction, is the real yoga. Being in such yoga, one should act and give up all involved activity. Avedanam is yoga and is the peaceful asanam, the posture. Remain in this state, declare the wise. Be totally eschewing the mood of I and mine, one is freed from all misery, as one cuts at the root of desire. By identifying with the state, even if one person performs action, one is said to have given up all action. This is how sage Vasishta initiated Prince Rama into Atma Jnana. The same was repeated by sage Valmiki for the benefit of his disciple Bharadwaja. The heaviest anchor, which does not allow the ship of the being to leave the port of samsara, is the sense involvement or identification. When the mind or senses are not directly in contact with their objects, the involvement is nurtured by the memory or remembrance as mentioned in the earlier verses. The suggestion to keep quiet for attaining the highest is not to be taken as inactivity. There are two aspects of reality. One is the movement or activity, the other one is non-activity. It is impossible to totally stop the activity even for a short duration of time. However, by identifying oneself with drashta, that which witnesses, one can and does remain unaffected by the activity. This has been hinted very clearly in the verses extolling yoga of avedanam. The whole story of life, as such, appears to be the play of ahankara, the activity of limiting the consciousness. With this first fall, the speed increases with chittam, the remembrance accelerated with buddhi, manas and indriyas, till one totally is on the terra firma of indulgence and misery. Each indulgence is a potential habit of involvement as it gets stored in the consciousness as the memory. And this memory or the act of remembrance can continue to pester the seeker. The trick lies in learning the art of observing without reaction, beginning with the grosser manifestations like the body, up to Ahankara itself, when one realizes that all the so called gross are nothing but the expressions of the divine. If one aspires to climb the terrace of the house, one has to climb the steps. Each step, a step, each time a step is climbed, one has to leave or give up the lower step. On finally reaching the terrace, one realizes that the steps, whether lower or higher, are made of the same stuff, brick, lime, and mortar. So also, everything is made of pure consciousness.